The possible downside risk if this breaks, Bitcoin price risks drop to 71K, back to the election, low essentially when Trump was elected. As tariff hurts U.S. business outlook, Bitcoin may see a sizable bounce at 71K if U.S. trade tariffs result in further Bitcoin spot pressure. So, quote, higher than expected U.S. tariffs pressure Bitcoin. Bitcoin reacted noticeably worse than U.S. stocks, as it always does, right? It's a much smaller market. After these were announced, Bitcoin fell 8.5% on the day. Luckily, it was because it was at a high of 88.5, while the S&P managed to end Wall Street trading just 0.07% higher. Now, this is yesterday. We'll talk about the actual S&P in a moment. An accompanying chart showed the Philadelphia Fed's Business Outlook Survey back under 15 for the first time since the start of 2024. So people on the overall landscape out there don't think that this is going to be a good thing. Late 2022 was the pit of the most recent crypto bear market when Bitcoin had reversed at 15.6. So you can see right here, this blue line on the far right. This is the business outlook, which has just dropped off an absolute cliff, right? And the last time, we were even remotely in this area was during, pretty far down in 2022, already like on this big crash down, down there from the S&P, rather. That wasn't Bitcoin, excuse me. So not looking great there. While no guarantee of the future outlook, this metric does have false signs. This is a data reading that we've had before at very high risk zones, year 2000, year 2008, and 2022, telling us to keep a very open mind. So all else equal, a daily close above 91K, if we could ever get there with Bitcoin, would be a strong bullish reclaim signal in the next couple of weeks. Failing that, a dip into the 71K zone would likely see a sizable bounce. So I'll leave the TA to Brett. Now, some possible silver lining here. Bitcoin price focus on U.S. liquidity trend. A silver lining is that risk assets could come in the form of increasing global liquidity. Remember, we've been talking about the global M2 money growth. In the U.S., the Fed has already begun to loosen tight financial policy with bets on a return to so-called quantitative easing. Now, it probably wouldn't be the absolute financial bazooka that we saw in 2020 and 2021 that spiked markets upwards, but we will see some loosening, which means more liquidity, which means more money flowing into other assets. So M2 money supply is due for an influx, something that historically has spawned major Bitcoin price upside. The big takeaway is that a big M2 influx is already coming. The exact date is less important. So if you take a look at this chart, you can see that Bitcoin price, and by extension, altcoin price, follows M2 money supply very, very closely with a 77-day offset, and this, for example, on a 108-day offset. You can see that as this came up, this came up, as this came down, and again, this is adding 72 days to it. But you can see this yellow line here is what global liquidity has done in a very big way. It has just ramped big time. So we should expect, hopefully, tariffs throw a big kind of monkey wrench in this, that normally, had it not been for tariff mania, this would have been a big signal for Bitcoin to blast right up to new all-time highs. As you can see, if on a 108-day offset, we have this similar structure of getting low, bouncing up, coming back down on April 6th. That's pretty close. That would be the low. Some flat until May, and then upwards, rock and roll, maybe by the time panic subsides. Now, some other good things here is that more states just keep over and over and over adding to the idea of being able to push for Bitcoin reserves. Alabama and Minnesota has now joined the fray. That makes 26 states that have introduced these bills. Doesn't mean they're going to pass, but in fact, some of them have been rejected. But it is a positive sign to see that now half of the states have put in bills to enshrine Bitcoin and be able to have the state do it. Now, this is going to take years to play out, so don't expect this anytime soon. But the Minnesota Bitcoin Act was introduced by the state house, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, on the same day, Alabama put theirs forward as well, which allows the state to invest in crypto, but essentially limits that to just Bitcoin. Minnesota's Bitcoin Act would allow the state's investment board to invest state assets in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and permit state employees to add crypto to their retirement accounts. This was interesting. It would also exempt crypto gains from state income taxes. Now, that's not something I've actually seen before at a state level, unless I've missed it. Especially, in states with higher income taxes, that would be pretty damn cool. It gives you an advantage in that asset class. So, bills to create Bitcoin reserves have been introduced in 26 U.S. states, with Arizona the closest to passing the law. However, Pennsylvania was one of the first. However, initiatives to have reportedly eventually rejected in some states. Similar to bills were also killed in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, which is very surprising. I would have expected those to be more freedom states, if you will, that were all about that. A couple more things here before I'll pass it over to Brett is that the U.S. House Committee, this is a big deal, passes the Stablecoin Regulating Stable Act. This is going to be a big deal for crypto. This is really, really good for us, is that we need more overall transactions running on stablecoin rails. And we need a ton of backing by the US government to say, yep, this is good. So then banks, instead of using the old outdated Fedwire system, so on and so forth, could either use existing stablecoin rails or create their own, which I believe Bank of America is already starting down that path. So what this means for you is that this speeds up the velocity of money, encourages more use of crypto overall, and instead of having to send stupid payments on Zelle or Cash App or whatever, you'd be able to use them directly on stablecoin rails 24/7 and have those things updated instantly instead of like sending a wire to someone and having it take 2-3 days to actually verify and have to pay a $30 fee. So, U.S. House Financial Services Committee has passed a Republican-backed stablecoin framework bill, which will now head to the House floor for a full vote. This is a big deal. The bill would provide rules around stablecoin payment. Stablecoins, a crypto token tied to a currency such as US dollar, aims to ensure issuers give information about their businesses, how they back their tokens, basically make sure you have like a full backing, right? Because you want far more transparency there. Likewise, the Stablecoin Genius Act also weaves through Congress. The U.S. Banking Committee, Senate Banking Committee voted through the Genius Act in an 18-6 vote. Basically, they're trying to say, okay, maybe we can pair these things together so we don't have to have like a head-to-head decide which one is going to get through. So both Stable and Genius Act will now have to wait until debate time on the floor of the House and Senate, respectively, before heading to the floor for a vote. It'd be great if we could do this. Now, I'm just going to take this one excerpt from a very long excerpt from Arthur Hayes, which I shared briefly beforehand. Bitcoin value, and this just came out yesterday. He's talking about tariffs and whatnot. So Bitcoin value equals technology plus fiat liquidity. Bitcoin trades solely based on market expectation for the future supply of fiat. If my analysis of the Fed's major pivot from quantitative tightening to quantitative easing for the treasuries is correct, then Bitcoin hit a local low of 76,500 last month, and now we begin the ascent to 250,000 by year end. Of course, this is not an exact science, but using the gold example, if I had to place a bet on whether I thought Bitcoin would hit 76,500 or 110,000 first, I would bet on the latter. Now, this came out before the Trump actual tariff policy was announced, so I don't know if he'll change his mind on that. Even if U.S. stocks continue falling in reaction to tariffs, a collapse in earnings expectations, or foreign demand waning, I am confident the odds favor Bitcoin continuing to climb higher. We've been buying at his fund. We've been buying Bitcoin and shitcoins at all levels between 90,000 and 76,500. The pace of capital deployment will quicken or slacken depending on the accuracy of my predictions. I still believe Bitcoin can hit 250,000 by the end of the year. Now that this has put Powell in his place, and the Fed will flood the market with dollars. So one thing the Fed could do, in fact, let's pop over here just for a moment. One thing the Fed could do, in addition to dropping their rates, so far it looks like we've gotten a little bit of movement today, is that we have about a 56% guess rate that we'll get a 25 BIP decrease in June, not necessarily the next Fed decision. I mean, the Fed really should be cutting rates like last month. They probably won't cut in May, but it looks almost certain that we'll get a rate cut in June, which will help. And if we look at trueflation, it's really just fallen off a cliff. I mean, if you take a look just at the last month, we had this fall. I mean, really, you can see when Trump took office, inflation index on trueflation, 3%. Now we're down at 1.3. I mean, we've cut that in half, and we're well under the Fed target. So remember, the Fed runs on data that's about 2 months behind. And so their last reading was at about 2.8, which, was right about where it was 2 months ago. So the next Fed meeting, we should start seeing some measurable movements here. And then by the time we get to June, they'll definitely have the ammo that this has slowed down enough to make that a reality. You can see today we're a little bit red. Bitcoin's bounced just a little bit from the 81,300-ish low. And then you can see fear and greed is 25, probably be a hell of a lot lower today, frankly, after that big drop. And then crypto fear and greed 24. If we bounce this out to the last 30 days, we've just been pretty much fearful the whole time. And that's kind of all I had. Really, the only thing I'll leave this to Brett. The only thing I've been watching on Bitcoin is just the fact that, and this isn't an exact science, not the best line ever, but we have had this support, 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 support. So I'm really hoping that, we're kind of at a crucial thing. We're at this like crossroads here, and it's not looking great, in which Bitcoin has managed to hold this support on the trend line ever since the bear market, started turning around. And then likewise, we've had this overhead resistance since the top that we can't seem to break through. We briefly wicked through, but you can see almost perfectly. We got rejected right there, and that wick just served as, a fake out. So we're kind of in between this crossroads, and all things being equal, I would assume more down than up. But hopefully the market will shrug this off, and we won't have such a huge drop. The S&P is down 3.5% today. A bunch of main tech stocks, the Mag 7, are down pretty ugly. Things like Apple are not looking great because a lot of their parts and things are made overseas, which means that they're going to get squeezed on margin. So, anyways, that's all I've got for you right now. I'm kind of just in wait and see mode because it's hard to make any decisions when markets are freaking. So I would just say try to be patient and just kind of ride this one out, and we'll see what happens next. But I'm going to pass this back over to Brett and see what his opinions and ideas are here.
Awesome. Yeah, great stuff. All right, thank you, Mike. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen too. And I was just pulling up the FedWatch tool to kind of see what that's showing.
Oh yeah, I meant to pull that up. Good idea.
Okay, cool. Should have it here. So let me know if you guys can see this. I got controls all over the place, moving around. But the FedWatch tool, yeah. So June, they're 64% that they'll keep it where it is, right? So, but as you go into July, as you were saying, that probability, or sorry, June, where am I? We're in May, sorry. So 80% they keep it where it is. June, 60%, they sort of start to drop. That is what they're showing, right? So, and then we get into July, 400, 425, and then even greater chances that it'll start dropping. So it's right around the horizon, and all of that looks good. But as you guys know, I always say, show me the charts, I'll tell you the news. And it's not looking really good here. So things can change, obviously. That M2 money could save the day. But in terms of Arthur Hayes originally saying 70K, and nobody wanted to believe it, we've been following the IBIT for some time. Let's take a look at the IBIT here. Normally, I watch it on a 4-hour time frame. And you guys know the gaps on the 4-hour, which is where this chart is normally drawn, have been very accurate in kind of predicting the magnet of where things are going to go. So let's jump to the 4-hour just to kind of show you that, but I'll go back to that daily, which is showing, what we already had been talking about. There's a large unfilled gap here that from the IBIT from here, 46 to 44, I guess that's about a 5%, 10% drop. And so the corresponding level on Bitcoin could be around 70K. All of this can change in a heartbeat, so it's really hard to use this. However, these gaps have been filling, especially the large ones. And so it's harder to see on this daily, but it's not hard to see this big one. And there's a couple smaller ones down here I don't think we'll get to, but this one here is the concern. So if we were to drop down a little bit more, that would come down this range. Now, we've also formed a new gap to the upside. It's weird how these things are. I did cover it in the M3 Active Trader. The cause of these, it's called a fair value gap, and especially on the CME futures, that they tend to fill as well. I won't go into that here, but there's a great write-up on that. If you want, I'll send you the link. At any rate, it's really hard to know where we are right now at this point. So weekly basis, a lot of sell pressure up in this range. We can see that very clearly with our order block detector. And so, who's doing it, why that's happening, we can speculate all day long. However, this is rejecting here in this sell block around 90K. We can also see it on the 1 hour, 4 hours, very clear. Hey, this is Brett from Moonstream. If you'd like to learn more about our pro trading signals or our live classes every Wednesday or our Retire Rich program, go over to moonstream.io/start.